You've seen this bird before, perched along highways, soaring over fields, and screaming from the sky. The red-tailed hawk is one of the most common and one of the most iconic hawk species in North America, but most of us barely know anything about it. For example, did you know that there's 16 subspecies of red-tailed hawk around the world? This bird isn't just common, it's extremely complex. In this video, we're going to deep dive into the red-tailed hawk world. We're going to talk about different morphs of the species, how to ID the different red-tailed hawk subspecies, where these subspecies are found, lesser known facts and myths about the red-tailed hawk, and more. Let's dive in. So first of all, where does this bird fall in the family tree of birds? It's part of the order Aciptridae, which are eagles and other hawk species, including kites as well. And it's in the genus Buteo, which are the broad-winged hawks. Its species name Jamaicensis is just for where the first species of the red-tailed hawk was described from, Jamaica. So first of all, how do you know that you're looking at a red-tailed hawk? Obviously, the most common ID mark that you can look for is that bright red tail. It also has patagial bars on its wings, and in some cases it has a belly band, which is something that a lot of birders look for in the field. It's also important not to rely just on the belly band because there's a few other hawk species that also could have a slight belly band as well. The last thing to look for is the broad wings of the red-tailed hawk. If you're looking for a size comparison, it's larger than a crow and a raven, but it's also smaller than an eagle. It is important to note though that size is nearly impossible to tell in the field. A lot of times we don't have a field of reference. There's not going to be a crow or a raven or an eagle nearby when you see a hawk. So this is kind of not something you should rely on alone. The juvenile red-tailed hawks might not have that red tail. In fact, most cases they don't. It's like a light brown tail, so you need to pay attention to the other factors that I laid out for you. They will have 7 to 9 dark bars that are uniform width on the tail though, so you can look for that. Like I mentioned before, there's a ton of subspecies for the red-tailed hawk. Morphs include dark morph hawks, light morph hawks. There's also Crider's red-tailed hawk, which is technically considered a subspecies, but some people just think it's an extremely light morph hawk. There's an ongoing debate about that. And like I mentioned, there's 16 subspecies of red-tailed hawk that are divided into 2 groups. We'll get into that in just a minute. Here's the call of the red-tailed hawk. You might recognize this call from Hollywood. They used to put this over bald eagles on a regular basis because they thought it sounded a lot more majestic than the actual bald eagle call. So a lot of people know this call, they just don't recognize that it comes from the red-tailed hawk. Females, like a lot of raptors, are larger than the males as well. Here's a few species that you might be confusing for red-tailed hawks out there. First is the Swainson's hawk. This is personally my favorite hawk species. I'll definitely be doing a video about this one in the future, so subscribe if you don't want to miss that. The second hawk on this list is the rough-legged hawk. And of course, this will kind of be a winter-only problem as rough-legged hawks tend to be much further north until winter comes where they drop down further south. On the rough-legged hawk, the feathers drop all the way down almost to its feet, but on the red-tailed hawk, it only goes about to the mid-torus, just a fancy way of saying the mid part of the leg. The next hawk is the Ferruginous hawk. Again, this is a very similar species to the red-tailed hawk when you're looking at it from a distance especially, but that leg feathers problem is the same thing. Red-tailed hawk feathers only go down to the mid-torus, whereas in the Ferruginous hawk, that's not the case. To make things a little bit more difficult, rarely there has been reported hybrids of Ferruginous and red-tailed hawks, as well as red-tailed hawks and rough-legged hawks and red-shouldered hawks. This is where things get a little bit complicated because the red-tailed hawk is widespread all over North America and the Antilles Islands as well. It's actually expanded its range into eastern North America, and this is just due to forests being cleared for agriculture. It's just created a more suitable habitat for the red-tailed hawk to expand. It's actually kind of overtaken the red-shouldered hawk's territory in that case. In its breeding range, it can be found from central Alaska all the way down to the Baja Peninsula. So red-tailed hawk morphs are actually extremely interesting because some of them vary by region. This is known as polymorphism, and others do not. They kind of blend and cross lines. So I'm going to go over the 16 subspecies of red-tailed hawk. First, I just want you to note there's Calurus, which is the most variable subspecies of red-tailed hawk. It looks very different. There's Borealis, which is more on the eastern side of the United States. There's Crider's, which is found almost primarily in the northern Great Plains region. And then there's the Harlan's red-tailed hawk, which is mostly in Alaska. So there are 16 subspecies divided into two groups. First, we have the typical red-tailed hawks, and all of the subspecies are going to fall into this category except for one, and that second group is the Harlan's red-tailed hawk. At one time, it was actually treated as a distinct species. That might become the case in the future as well. You never know with birds, it flip-flops as new data comes out, but yeah, at one point, Harlan's was a separate species. It's also important to note that it's not possible to identify every single one of these subspecies in the field. This is mostly for just regional variation. By sight, you can only identify a few of them. Okay, so first you have the borealis or eastern red-tailed hawk. This one can be naturally found in the eastern US and Canada. Second, we have the crideri or Crider's red-tailed hawk. This one is sometimes, again, considered to be an extreme light morph red-tailed hawk. But what's interesting is that it's limited to its kind of region in the Great Plains of South Central Canada and the northern United States. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is indeed a subspecies. Next is the Abieticola, which breeds in the boreal zone from Alaska to the Atlantic Canada. Then we have Umbrinus, which lives in the Florida Peninsula. Then we have Solitudinus, which it's a smaller version of Umbrinus, which also lives in Florida. Next we have the Jamaicensis, and yes, this is Budio jamaicensis. So the subspecies is also jamaicensis, and this one lives in Jamaica, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Then we have Alicensis, which breeds in Alaska, but generally stays north of California. Next is going to be Calurus, which is the Rocky Mountain Range, north to south, and also into Mexico and parts of Central America as well. Next we have Socorroensis, which lives on the island of Socorro in the archipelago near Baja California. Then we have Satoni, which lives in Baja California, Fortesi, which is in southeastern Arizona into central Texas, Fumosus, which lives in the Tres Marias Islands. Then we have Hadropus, which lives in South Durango and San Luis Potosi in Mexico. Then we have Kempsiesi, which is in Chiapas, Mexico, and also into Nicaragua as well. Then we have the Costa Ricensis, which I bet you can guess where this one lives, Costa Rica, as well as Panama. So those are 15 of the typical red-tailed hawk subspecies. Is this important? It's important to highlight the diversity that we have within the species themselves. Now let's drop into Harlan's, which is group 2 and the only one in group 2. So Harlani, which is found in central Alaska to British Columbia. It winters in the Great Plains region and Midwest to the Gulf Coast. This is known to vagrate, and we've gotten them in Utah before. It's extremely interesting to see that subspecies drop into other areas, because maybe someday, if it's on your list and you've identified it correctly, you could have a separate species. Whew, what a mouthful of subspecies that was. The two easiest to identify in the field are Harlan's and Crider's. Again, Crider's is extremely light, and Harlan's does look distinct, kind of as its own species. Let's get into behavioral things of the red-tailed hawk. First, in flight, it can fly up to 90 kilometers per hour through the air. A lot of times it'll ride thermals for soaring as well. It typically doesn't fly in extremely high winds, but when it does, it'll fly against those winds, which is known as kiting. It'll just hover in the air looking for prey as it angles its wings correctly and just stays almost completely still. It's really cool. They also perform courtship displays in the air where the male will sometimes hit the back of the female as it's flying over it. Sometimes they will also interlock their talons and plummet towards the ground. They actually have been known to hit the ground before, but in those cases, it's just been observed that they basically just bounce off the ground and get right back up. No injuries. Its diet primarily consists of rodents, reptiles, rabbits, other birds. In urban areas, it'll eat rats, squirrels, and pigeons as well. So the nesting for the red-tailed hawk is pretty interesting. It typically starts in late February. They have one brood per year. Again, a brood is how many sessions they lay. But if that brood fails, they'll typically try again. Males and females actually participate pretty heavily in the nest, so they'll both pick the nest site in a lot of cases, and they'll both help raise and incubate the young as well. Typically, they like to nest in mixed coniferous and deciduous forests, which are adjacent to large fields, so they can easily hunt. But they're also known to nest on cliffs, radio towers, and other structures where there's not a lot of trees available. They're really adaptable birds. In southern Arizona, in fact, they'll actually nest in the saguaro cacti, which is pretty awesome in my opinion. They're a generalist species and they really do well in most circumstances. The nest takes about a week to build, and sometimes they'll return to the same nest site year after year. They don't like to nest near humans though, and if they do return to the same nest site, they'll actually build their nest bigger and bigger and bigger each year as well and add on to it. Their eggs are white, but they have a ton of blotches on them and they're smooth to the touch. Each clutch that they have, again, that's how many eggs they lay at one time, is around 2 to 3, but sometimes they can also lay up to 4 eggs. The incubation takes about a month, but after the eggs hatch, they feed them for about 5 weeks in the nest. The weak young are typically punished by the parents, and they'll prioritize the stronger baby birds that they have in the nest. Again, around 45 days, the young will leave the nest, but they typically stay around that area for another 6 to 7 weeks. The parents will also kind of help out, and they don't just kick them straight out of the nest. They'll actually bring food to them in a lot of cases after they leave in that fledgling period. So they're pretty active raptor parents. You'd actually think, because this hawk is so big, it is a large hawk species, that they wouldn't have any predators, but great horned owls actually prey on red-tailed hawks, especially the young, but they are also documented to go after the adults as well. Corvids and other species like that will also go after eggs if they're left unattended. Some fun facts about the red-tailed hawk: they actually have an 8 times more powerful sight than us humans. So you know how you use your 8-time binoculars for birding? They got that built in to their systems. This is to help them hunt. Red-tailed hawks also have a third eyelid called a nictitating membrane. It's translucent so they can see through it, and if they're diving through the air, that makes sense to have a built-in pair of binoculars so they don't have to close their eyes when the wind is ripping at their faces, and it's just another cool trait that they have. The red-tailed hawk might be common, but it is extremely diverse in its complexity. Whether you're birding in a city or the middle of nowhere, the red-tailed hawk can be constantly found in both of these areas. Its story is all around us. All we have to do is look. Remember that over on the Bright Eyed Birding channel, I take you birding with me once a week on adventures where we see red-tailed hawks out in the field. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright Eyed Birding Learn.